Welcome to Soulful Conversations with Nadjejda. I'm Nadjejda Chapoteau. I am an empowerment and confidence coach, spiritual teacher, and speaker. I am passionate about dance, social justice, nature, spiritual growth, love, making a difference, specifically in empowering women and children in my homeland, Haiti, empowering Haitian people in general. I'm very much passionate about my homeland and empowering them and truly, especially in the area of education and women empowerment. And I am very much, which is very much in line with my work, I'm passionate about empowering women around the world and embracing their authentic self, loving and liking who they are and sharing their authentic self to speaking their truth. And as a coach, I help purpose driven and ambitious women entrepreneurs experience ease, clarity, confidence, and fun in their businesses by discovering their message and finding their niche. I also work with ambitious women who don't have a business, but they have a story to share. They really want to impact the world. I help them find their voice and share their message and really impact the world through finding their voice and speaking their truth. I am all about speaking their truth, which is very much a big part of my work with my clients. So we are back again today. We decided to do this as I shared at the end of last week's episode. We're talking about spiritual bypass in the online space, especially when it comes to with the law of attraction, the way it's being taught to many of us by many teachers out there. We're back with Alexis P. Morgan and Siobhan McAuley. So before I bring them in, I have Alexis P. Morgan. She is the pole dancing, sword wielding democratic socialist on the low-ho sorceress you've been warned about. She makes her cheddar as a professional writer, facilitator, artist, ritualist, and priestess. Devoted to truth, justice, and liberation, she lives in the spirit of her foremothers before her, unbossed, unbought, unbordered. And then my next guest, which were with me last week, and as you're gonna notice, you know me, I'm about being authentic. We did record this episode in one day, but I thought it would best to have it into two episodes. So my next guest is Siobhan McAuley, is the founder and CEO of Steering the Soul Consulting, a values-based business that champions women who want to do great work in the world, make shift that matters, and help others along the way. A former six-figure business owner in the overcrowded online coaching space, she pulled the plug on her 20K per month dream business in order to realign her work with what she valued most. Now she teaches other women how to do the same because she believes that the body of work that our life represents does not require us to sacrifice our values to sacrifice our values to be compensated for the contribution that only we can make that only we can make in the world, so to the world. So I highly recommend, if you missed last week's episode, then I highly recommend that you go and check it out. But feel free to check it here. But if you may be feeling a little bit lost because we shared a lot last week, then I really invite you to go ahead and watch episode 1. If you are watching me on my website, you'll see it. It's the one, if you go to the main click on the menu where it says click on Soulful Conversations with Nadjejda, you will see the episode, which I would say, I believe it's episode 39, but you'll see it's basically the one below that one. And same thing if you're watching, if you're listening to me via Apple Podcasts, iTunes, which was iTunes before, same thing. Go ahead and check out last week's episode so that this can make much more sense to you. I thought this was a really great topic to discuss. So let's go back to the ladies. Thanks for joining us again. Okay, so we're back again with Alexis Morgan and Siobhan McAuley. So there's, as you can tell, there's so much. And actually, with you want to start off where she was, because there was so much information, and I actually have a few things that I want to ask about that. But you want to say something about what Siobhan was just sharing regarding, this whole thing of like always having to go after more and having to take it
Yeah.
away from somebody else.
Yeah. So while I was listening, I remembered, I think Adam Smith, he's kind of like the father of capitalism, actually admitted that at one point early on, when he first put forward this economic theory, that it would be very good for a very small number of people and very, very bad for everybody else. And he sort of like admitted and took ownership of the fact that this would be the impact. And I was thinking about how like a lot of like that false scarcity really can be sort of like traced back to capitalism, because capitalism requires unrestrained, constant, unlimited growth that just keeps growing and growing and growing. And it also requires a sense of scarcity. And that part of that separation, that feeling of separation, is caused by how we sort of distribute resources, because there needs to be a gap in order for that gap to be filled and for profit to be made. And one of the interesting things about like sort of pre-capitalism and sort of how uh, we related to like very early economics and very small scales is that it actually operated kind of on a system of credit. So you would forge a sword for this person, and then they would come back that spring and they would give you like 3 chickens.
Yeah.
And it was not like a direct barter, like in that sort of like direct exchange like we have now, but it was just sort of like resources like circling through communities of various sizes. And even when we sort of like grew into like bigger cities, you would still have that sort of system going on with merchants where they remembered who their customers were, and their customers would come back and pay them. And then we started getting into currency and all that kind of stuff. So I totally agree that part of this is just based on how we've all sort of been roped into this economic structure that serves and was designed to serve approximately like a handful of people and screw everybody else. And when you have that, it's like constantly revs you and puts your survival at risk. So if you don't comply, it sort of like creates this illusion that if you don't comply, your life is threatened. It literally becomes like this life or death sort of like flight or flight response. And while that is true to a certain extent for a lot of people, where they couldn't just be like, fuck the system and bounce, um, it's also not true in the sense that if we all just sort of like collectively recognize it together, we could make a lot of sort of headway against it. And I think the Black Panther Party in the 70s, that's part of the reason why the government went after them so hard. It wasn't because of the armed sort of like protests and being willing to shoot back at cops. It was because they were feeding mothers and babies. They were collectively organizing and distributing resources in a way that was helping the community thrive. And the government was just like, nah, we're good. You cut it out. Like, that's not great. So I totally agree. And I think that breaking away from that, and I think that's why a lot of Westerners are also really interested in Buddhism in particular, is because there is this de-emphasis on the material in a way that they're not used to seeing. And I also think that's why a lot of people are attracted to certain strains of like evangelical Christianity as well, because there's that de-emphasis on the physical. But unfortunately, we can get into far more contentious conversations about those things.
Yeah.
But I think that's also why there's an appeal there, because it sort of affirms, it both affirms what is comfortable, which is being disembodied, but it also alleviates what is causing that discomfort, or appears to alleviate what's causing that discomfort, by giving somebody something else to think about, whether it's becoming enlightened or going to heaven one day, you know, whatever it might be. So yeah, I think that's totally A plus on point.
Yeah. So there's something, Siobhan, that when you share that, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this too, Alexis, is when you said there's something that you were saying about always having to depend on somebody, having somebody, you know, I was just curious, would you call that as well in terms of like for example, since we're talking about the online space, because we're all in the online space, how there are people where, you know, for example, I'm going to give an example of coaches where they offer this program and then they always, you know, usually they tell you, you want people to be your repeat customers. So in some ways, it kind of seems like, you know, I'm just curious if that's kind of like, would you consider one of those models too, where in some ways, like they're not giving everything because they're creating other things and then selling it to the same person over and over again. So if anything, that person can become your lifetime customer.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how it happens. In my experience in the online space, and I mean, I've been in business for myself for, I guess, most of my adult life, and I'm 49. But I've been in the online space actively, I guess, since 2012, and very actively in the last 3 to 4 years. And my experience is that what we're taught in the online space is that we need to sell a result, and we need to convince our customers of the value of that result. And this is specifically what I was taught.
Yeah.
People have
because they tell you people buy solutions to their problems.
Yeah. So what's inherent in that is that you have to convince people that they're broken if you're going to convince them to buy the solution that you're selling them. So there's several different problems that are happening there. One is we have to be conditioned to believe that we're broken. We have to perpetuate that belief in others and in society. We're short-term focused on a result rather than recognizing that, you know, like nature doesn't operate on a result, it operates on a process. Everything in the universe is a process. Growth is a process. We're not born and then we're instantly 24 and then we're instantly 69 and then we're instantly dead. It's a process, right? But in this model, this capitalist model, they've skewed the system essentially for the benefit of, like Alexis said, there has to be a gap. And then our job is to sell them the solution to close the gap. That's actually the language that we're taught. You have to identify the gap, and then you have to get the client to feel the pain of the consequence of not being able to close that gap. And at the same time, get them to imagine the possibility of what it'll feel like when they have closed it. And then say to them, this is how we actually do it on a sales conversation. So if you could do X, Y, Z so that you could stop feeling like this and start having this result, would you commit to doing that? And they say, absolutely. Great, that'll be $15,000. So that's how the process works. Now what happens though is we sell them that solution, but that solution is never the whole thing. And it can never be the whole thing because we've sold them a result, not a process. So having repeat customers, I don't see as the problem, right? So like now that I've restructured my business so that I'm not perpetuating that system or participating in that system anymore, or training the people that I work with to follow that system and be a part of it. Now what the language that I use to describe that is building capacity. And the way that I refer to this is that when we're orienting ourselves in the world through the lens perception of the ego, it's like we're standing on the shore. But when we're orienting ourselves in the world through the lens perception of the soul, it's like we're in the ocean. So if you imagine that you're in the ocean, you can like lay back and float in the ocean, and the ocean will just support you. It will just carry you. So when we're oriented through the soul, we have this experience of being able to recognize that sufficiency. There's a buoyancy that carries us. So there's no stress, there's no anxiety. There's like, oh no, I've got to get another customer because I've got to make X number of dollars so that I can keep my business afloat this month, which is sort of the anxiety and the panic and the fear that drives a lot of what's happening in the online coaching space. And even the language reflects that. I have to get clients. I have to get paid. It's all about what do I have to take away from somebody else. So there's very specific things that for myself, I've identified as distinctions between what it's like when I'm allowing myself to rest in the buoyancy of the ocean and I'm recognizing the sufficiency that's always there, and the experience of what it's like when you're on the shore. And when you're on the shore, the conversation, it's often combative and confrontational. It's very loud. There's a lot of getting, there's a lot of results. There's a lot of manufacturing expertise and leveraging of other people's perceived influence in order to elevate one's own influence. There's a lot of using people's testimonials in order to elevate, again, one's expertise or influence. But the testimonials that are used are often a reflection of, this is the result that I said that I was going to sell. And that result is always, in the capitalist system, it's always measured by money and numbers. So it's going to be, I sold 5 people a $10,000 program and I earned $50,000 in 6 weeks. So it's all about money and numbers. So those are the testimonials we're going to see, but we're never going to hear about the people who were sold that result or that potential result that didn't actually achieve it. And what happens to those people? Well, they're told at the end of their program, when they don't get the results they were promised, then all of a sudden the metrics change. Now all of a sudden the metrics are, oh, but you learned so much and you had this transformation and you had this insight. Now I sell you this program. So the conversation goes on. So that's kind of what's happening on the shore. When we're in the water though, the experience is totally different, because now there's no need to get anything from anyone. The only thing we're interested in doing when we're oriented in the world through the soul's lens perception is creating. And creating is like waves coming to the shore. Sometimes the waves are just very slow and gentle, and other times they're crashing on the shore, but they're always there. There is never not a time when there is not a wave there. And so human beings, this is what consciousness wants. It wants to continuously create and make a contribution. The very act of creating is a contribution. We don't have to think about what's my contribution to society. All we have to do is create. And that is consciousness becoming aware of itself, because the process of creation is taking something that's inside of me that I don't even know is there and moving it outside of myself so that I can actually have a relationship to it. And in the process of doing that, I make it known to myself, but I also make it known to the world. So not only is my consciousness transformed, all of the world's consciousness is transformed in the process. Now there's nothing about me needing to get anything. If I'm operating in the world from this place of creating, everything I do is a contribution to the world. And divine law says, if I contribute, I receive compensation, right? This is how it works. That cyclical movement of resources, whatever shape or form those resources come in. Maybe the resources are, maybe Alexis writes a book and I love that book so much. And so I buy 5 copies of the book to give to different people. And then somebody else gets that book and they love a concept that she's alluded to. And then she decides to take action and build on something as a result of that. So it's just circulated around and around. So it's a very different experience, and the language that we use is critical to that, which is an interesting part of the law of attraction conversation, because there's a lot of this positive thinking, but the vocabulary is very limited, and the words no longer mean what they may have meant at some point in time. There's all kinds of words now that if you said them in the online space, people will take them to mean a certain thing because they become so overused, and it's a reflection of the fact that we don't actually ever think. We don't think critically. We don't stop to question, what is it I'm actually trying to say or to communicate or to articulate, because we don't want to create. We've been conditioned to solve problems, not create. That's the big distinction. Ego wants to solve a problem, so it's continuously looking for a problem to solve, and the soul only wants to create.
Great. Would you say, I don't know, the word that keeps coming up for me is experience.
Meaning
in terms of I mean, I guess I don't know if I want to use the word selling experience, but it's sort of like, you know, because for example, I love how you shared earlier, you were talking about something, but I think we were off record then, something about not working for money. Like I know for myself, sometimes I think about it, okay, if I say I you know, I would love to get 3 clients, instead of thinking I want 3 clients because, you know, they're going to pay me, I want to really help, you know, I want to empower 3 women to find their voices so they could experience what it's like to be able to speak their truth.
Yeah.
You know? So it's sort of like, so I'm just thinking like an experience instead of like, oh, you know, I'm going to help you, you know, get that job or get those clients or whatever, because when you find your voice, that's what, you know, so that's just one word that keeps coming up for me.
The way that I think about it myself and the way that I communicate this with the people that I work with is about building capacity. And what we're trying to build capacity around is our ability to stay in the ocean. And so you imagine that like we're going through life, the whole world is standing out on the shore, operating from this ego perspective. But you're floating on your back in the ocean. You're just creating, you're feeling that buoyancy. You're recognizing that sufficiency. It's all good. But then something happens and immediately that fear, that scarcity is triggered within you and you go running to the beach. And sometimes you don't even go to the beach. You go all the way up to the mountains. And then it takes you a while to get back down. And we see this in the online space. We see someone kind of course correct in their business and they think they're kind of getting more aligned with their values and they're starting to do things in a more authentic or aligned way. And then, I don't know, something happens. And suddenly they start operating the way that they learn to do business. And now they're out there beating people over the head, trying to get sales and trying to get clients, or they plan this great program and they think the program is like, oh my God, this is awesome. It's so aligned with the truth of who I am. It embodies all of my values. It demonstrates who I want to be in the world. It feels so good. And I want to get 10 people into my program, but they only get 1 person. And suddenly their metrics change. Now their metrics are not about creating the work that really matters. Now it's about money. Well, I can't run that program. And they're back on the shore and they're out there running to try to get something again. So this idea of building capacity, it's really about building our capacity to actually honor what matters most to us, to continuously commit to the things that we value most. Because if I change my metrics of success, if I change what I prioritize as a value, every time, you know, I get triggered personally, I'm never going to contribute to the world in the way that only I can and in the way that's most meaningful for me. And I'm also going to continue to perpetuate through my complicity all these systems that I'm a part of. So I'm not actually going to be part of the resistance that's changing consciousness. I'm actually going to be contributing to the very things that I stand against.
I get that, yeah. So Alexis, what are your thoughts?
I was just sitting here listening, processing. I think that it's funny because I was thinking about how this I've personally kind of gone through this cycle. So I got into online business actually in 2012 as well, except I was 21 and was running away from an abusive home. And I didn't have any other way to support myself. So I just kind of flopped backwards into online business. But the last 6-7 years for me, for sure, have definitely been an experience of building a capacity to float in the ocean. And I think that's part of the reason why my community kind of gathers to me and responds to me the way that they do sometimes. So this is very enlightening and helpful for me. So thank you for sharing that. And I now that I think about it, the more that I sort of learned to kind of float, the better things have become. And I think now I'm starting to be in a phase where I'm building a canoe, so I'm still floating, but I'm creating more space for myself and more freedom and more flexibility to kind of move around and see other parts of the ocean, right? So I'm still floating, but it's not in a way where I'm just kind of accepting everything that comes and not directing where I'm floating, you know, as heavily. Because so for example, a couple of years ago when I first moved to Chicago, I came because I was invited, and I just sort of took what was coming to me. So I ended up going to rural Tennessee, and then I received an invite to go to Flint, Michigan for some reason, because that was literally the only place I could go. So I ended up in Flint for like a year and a half, and then I was invited to come to Chicago. And that situation didn't work out, and I ended up becoming homeless for 3 months. And I often think about that and sort of like what led me to that point. And I think it was because I was just kind of going with the flow, and I was always okay. See, like I was always fine. Like it wasn't comfortable. It's not always been the greatest, but I've always been okay. I've always found somebody, a community member has swooped in, something has always like come to bear because I was focused on serving the community and serving the people around me, but I was also actively stating what I needed so that I could be supported as well. But it's sort of changed in the last year or so, where I've continued to focus on serving my community, but I'm also focused on what I actually need and taking steps in that direction. So I have a canoe so that I can float to other parts of the ocean. And I think that's where a lot of people who get pulled into like the law of attraction and like kind of like this mindset stuff, they're trying to build themselves a canoe. So like there's a part of them that sort of like intuitively like understands that, you know, this is possible. And I think that the law of attraction and sort of using this tool in the way that it's being taught is the way that they're going to get it. And that's not necessarily the case. Yeah, I think they're all trying to build a canoe.
Yeah,
so that they can float.
The problem with that boat is that it's got a hole in it. It's always got a hole in it because it's a canoe that's built on this consciousness of separation, right? Like in a whole boat, if you're coming from this place of I'm separate from my own divinity, right? Yeah, I definitely think that the online space has changed a lot, especially just I feel like it's changed a lot in the last like 2 to 3 years, but I feel like that change is accelerating. Like every day it's moving faster and faster and faster. And because I unfollow so many people, I don't even really know what's going on anymore with all the people that I used to kind of have relationships with in the online space, because you know what that's like is one of the things that comes up when I'm working with clients is this idea that when we're going through this place of going back and forth between the ocean and the shore, which we all are, all of humanity is doing it. Like some people have never experienced being in the water, or if they have, it's just like a little tiny moment a long time ago and it's long forgotten. But for us, we're relatively conscious and, you know, like working on this on a regular basis, we're going back and forth quite a bit. And what ends up happening is we kind of get into the water and we connect to a truth. Because one of the key distinctions that I see from the orienting ourselves in the world through the soul's lens perception is that truth is absolute from the soul's perspective. So we know slavery was wrong. We know the Holocaust is wrong. There is no debating that, right? When you're standing on the shore, though, people are going to debate that shit. And it's just like, who are you kidding? When you're in the ocean, you're just like, there's no conversation to be had. So therefore, there's nothing to discuss about that. So if you're coming from this place where it's like you're very grounded and centered in this universal or absolute truth, but then the moment something triggers you, you get entangled, you know, like this idea that you were talking about, Alexis, with the Norse time, sense of time being circular. When we think about morphic fields of resonance and that time is like this, it's this wave of energy moving in one direction and then another. And we just arbitrarily say this point is the present moment where these two things interact. So there's this morphic field of resonance that's happening on the shore that is all predicated on this managing of scarcity. So we're managing the scarcity of love, scarcity of recognition, scarcity of acknowledgement, scarcity of resources, scarcity of opportunity, all kinds of scarcity. So if we've got that in our energetic makeup somehow, we can be in the ocean and we're building our capacity, but just, you know, an interaction, it hooks into something and before you know it, we're back on the shore. So now we're standing on the shore and we're trying to tell everybody on the shore, hey, come into the ocean with me and experience this thing. But you can't take someone from the shore and bring them into the water if you're on the shore as well. You have to be in the water and invite them in. And that's what I see is really happening. But with law of attraction, what we have is bazillions of these like largely white women claiming to be spiritual, standing on the shore, yelling at everybody else, hey, come into the ocean with me, but they're not actually in the ocean themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this building capacity is really about this idea that it's like we have to, I liken it to if we freaked out and we ended up back on the shore, when we get back into the water, a lot of the time what happens is we still have a lot of anxiety and panic. So we're kind of treading water. And so we first get into the water and we're getting tired treading water. And so at some point our ego gets worn down essentially. And we have to rely on this deeper trust. And that's when we decide, oh, I bet if I just stopped treading water and I just laid back, I might actually float. I might actually be carried here. And so when I talk about this idea of building capacity, the time that it takes to do that is very different than the timeline the ego operates on. Because the ego can't function in the present moment. It only exists in the future or in the past. So hence the gap, right? In capitalism, here's the gap. The gap is the present moment because that's where the soul resides. The ego can't exist in the gap. So it's always trying to close the gap to get us to the next place. So everything in the capitalist model essentially is driven by the ego. So when we're building capacity though, it's like we might be selling one person at a time. It might take 10 years to build the capacity that we're looking for. But from the shore-based perspective of the ego, we're always sold using the metrics of money and numbers. So we're always going to be make $10,000 in 30 days, right? It's all about instant gratification, get this result, right? Mm-hmm. But when we're building capacity, it's about a process. So when you talk about this idea, are we selling an experience? I guess I'm not sure if I would call it an experience. I guess when I'm trying to articulate the work that I do and the promise or the value that my work brings, I'm trying to invite people into a deeper sense of knowing what that inner calling is for them. Mm-hmm. So when we're on the shore, we're marketed to using the words get this. But when we're in the ocean, what we're actually being guided to do is to pay attention to what is it that's calling me? What's drawing my attention? What's pulling me forward? So that we're always operating from a place that's internally motivated instead of operating from a place where we're looking outside ourselves for the answer. So I guess that could be an experience.
I totally get that. Now, I'm curious. Now, what are both of you? Because I know you talked about it. Again, I'm not saying that, but I'm just curious. Like when you talk about unfollowing people, and I don't know if Alexis, you do that too, but I know I do. But I'm just curious. But then, some people would say, well, we need to be talking to everyone because everybody exists. So I'm just curious. hey, we're okay. It's okay to disagree. So I love to hear. I'm just curious as to, so.
So I'm gonna start. So there's a lot of hay made about like this sort of idea of disposability, that no human is disposable, and I agree with that. However, humans behaving in a certain type of way definitely are disposable in the sense that we can put them outside the house until they stop behaving that way. Mm. So, and we all have different definitions of what that type of behavior looks like for us. And then obviously, like, we have social standards. So for example, if you're, say, a pedophile who's running for Senate, generally speaking, we put you outside the house because you're not trustworthy around children and you shouldn't have powers, like, generally. Yeah. Generally. So I'm not saying it always works, but, in general. So on that level, I totally agree. But I also don't think that it's everybody's responsibility to talk to everyone. It's not Black women's responsibility to speak to white women about their business, when white women are the ones who are perpetuating harm. I don't think if somebody is perpetuating harm on you, it's your responsibility to talk to them necessarily.
Okay.
I feel like it's your responsibility to speak your truth and for other people to listen, and then for those people to take the essence of what they've learned there and turn around and go, not today, and to like stop or, you know, engage with the people who are doing harm. So that way there's no exploitation, there's none of that like fucked up power dynamic stuff going on. In addition to that, I had another thought and it flew away. So I'm going to assume it wasn't important because it flew away. But no, I don't think it's always our responsibility to talk to everybody. And also because like it's impossible. It is impossible. As much as I love James Baldwin, I know for a fact that there are elements of his perspective on life and experience that I cannot understand and that don't speak to me and don't apply to me because I am not part of that experience. I am not a gay Black man. I am a queer Black woman, but I will never be a gay Black man. Therefore, anything he says to that effect does not apply to me. And it doesn't need to speak to me because it's not for me. Lemonade, as beautiful as an album as that was meant to speak to Black women. If it speaks to other people, great. But it wasn't made for them, and it didn't have to speak to them. And whether or not it spoke to you is kind of irrelevant. And obviously, like there's more nuance to that type of example. But I don't think we necessarily need to speak to all people. I think we need to kind of be nuanced. I think that's what a lot of people mean when they say that. Like we need to be more nuanced and think more critically and deeply about what we're saying. But does everything have to appeal to everybody? No.
Yeah, thanks for sharing.
If we look at this in the context of the online space specifically and how we're, largely taught to market our services, one of the big things that we're sold is this idea that we do need to differentiate ourselves. We need to separate ourselves. Right? And, so it's sort of like whoever shouts the loudest, whoever has the most followers, so we have been trained to actually measure our own value, our own worth based on numbers and money. If I'm not making any money in my business and I don't have any followers, well, then I'm a loser. I don't have anything of value to contribute. Well, doesn't that work well for the person whose platform is? I'll show you how to get visible and build your list and make more money.
I'll show you how to get 10,000 likes.
Of course, like if we're sitting there judging ourselves based on these measures that somebody else has sort of like planted or manipulated us with, then of course we're going to buy into that program or that offering or that belief system or whatever it is. So for me, a lot of it is, unfollowing people is sort of like, I want to be in the ocean. So unless you're in the ocean, I'm not interested in what you have to say on the shore, because I know that what you're saying on the shore, that if I'm not careful, I'm going to get pulled out of the water. And my job is to build capacity, because if I build capacity for myself to stay in the water, and this is actually a great connection to what you were saying, Alexis, this idea of building a canoe. When we have the capacity to stay in the water for longer and longer periods of time, and we're not flailing like we're drowning, and we're not treading water and getting exhausted, but we're just like experiencing that sufficiency, then we start to build a life raft, we start to build a boat, and we can invite people to join us in the boat. So like my responsibility is to build capacity in order to invite more people to build their own capacity, so collectively we can build capacity. Whereas what that might look like or how it might be articulated from the shore is, I'm going to go do my own thing and all I need to do is focus on my own stuff and I'll just think positive thoughts and the whole world will magically change. But it's a very different thing because of where they're starting from, right? But intent, impact, same thing.
Different people, different types of boats too.
Yes.
Because like there are a variety of boats, but not everybody needs or wants the same kind of boat.
Totally. Yeah. Now I'm curious, Alexis. Maybe we're not talking, like when you mentioned it's not Black women's role to talk to white women. Okay, about, I don't know. I think you were talking about maybe something specific, but I'm just curious. How are you talking, like, for example, how do we work together to
So,
move, to actually, create change, to make change happen.
So, so I should have probably been a little bit more nuanced about this. It's not black. Yeah.
Don't worry about this.
So a lot has been going around.
It could be about something else. Yeah. And I think there are definitely times where I don't have to, talk to you about, your issues or something, but there is this, I wanted to bring it up in terms of about how do we work together.
Yeah.
So we can create change.
So there's been a lot of hay being made on the internet, especially in the wake of that particular Senate election here in the States, about Black women sort of saving everybody, right? And as many of the women of as many women of color have pointed out, we didn't save y'all, we protected ourselves. So
although it seems like we're always protecting, we always have to protect.
Yes, we're always protecting ourselves. It's never about saving y'all. It's always about covering our own soul. So what I meant by Black women don't have to, speak to white women. What I meant by that is that they're not obligated to speak to white women. They are obligated to speak their truth, and other people are obligated to listen and decide, well, I'm not an anti-racism educator, so please, grain of salt, go listen to people who have more experience than I do. But basically what I was trying to get at is that it's a choice, and that people can engage with building relationships and building connections, but it doesn't we don't always have to do that. It doesn't always have to build connections that way. Sometimes a thing is just for one group of people, and as long as those people aren't actively stomping on other people whilst doing that, I write better than I speak, I promise. I'm more eloquent. I'm more eloquent in the written format. But basically, that was my point, is that as long as it's not being forced or compelled in a way that somebody's under duress, that we can, there are ways to work together, but oftentimes that also requires looking at the power dynamics and being honest about the power dynamics of the situation and how people are relating and connecting. That's sort of what we get into with cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation. What are the power dynamics? How are the people from whom one culture, experiences their things? So for example, wrapping your hair, how are they treated when they do it versus when you are treated when you do it? What are the political and these other consequences, and sort of taking into account the relationship between people before saying, oh, we're working together, but are you really working together? And if you're not, then what do you need to do to sort of remove those barriers? And if those are systemic barriers, then how do you rearrange yourself so that you're removing those systemic barriers while you're also, not using power in a way that's abusive or otherwise, diminishes the party or the group of people who have been sort of systemically isolated and, marginalized? I don't know if I made any sense whatsoever when I answered that question.
I think so. In the online space, because the online space is predominantly, if we're talking about online coaching, it's predominantly white women that are doing that. Kind of the industry is predominantly white women who adopted these male dominated practices from the East, they translated to the West. And I think because of their centeredness in the system, women just can't. White women can't see it. If you're a part of a system that oppresses you, you're aware of the system. You think systemically all the time because the system's constantly working against you. But if you're the one who the system upholds and centers and approves of and supports and validates and champions, then you don't see the system. The system is what? I don't see that. So we really have to train people to think systemically, but by no means do I think that that is the responsibility of the people who can actually see the system that are being oppressed by it. And that was a conversation that was happening a lot in the online space. And I think in response to Layla's post, there was a lot of white women who were looking for women of color to educate them, you know? And I think in those circumstances, what needs to happen is that the people that it really matters to, they'll educate themselves. They'll Google it, they'll read books, they'll seek out conversations, they'll follow people's work, you know what I mean? And if we stand there and say, oh, well, you need to educate me, basically what's happening is a white woman standing on the shore asking a woman of color to leave this place of capacity that's not just for herself, it's for the whole frickin' world, right? So that's not gonna work, right?
Totally get that. Great. Okay, so I'm just curious, what do you feel like you guys want to add before we wrap this up in terms of this conversation? I feel like we talked about so many things. Like actually, is there something that you would want to share that you feel like you haven't shared? Either one of you, or I mean, both of you. Obviously, you all get a chance.
I'll let Siobhan go first.
I don't have anything to add, I don't think. I've said plenty.
I don't really have anything to add for myself, but I will add for other women of color. Hire women of color, pay people of color, like, speak us out, but like, don't like leech, like, don't attach and just take away. Like, give something in return. And oftentimes, because we can't, like, individual, like, white people specifically can't give power away necessarily, like, on a systemic level. They can in, like, certain instances, of course. A lot of times that's just resources and amplifying and redistributing resources in your community. I'll just add that because I always add that. Pay Black women, darn.
Well, and actually, piggybacking on that, I think it's important. One of the things that has been a huge exploration for me that I'm still exploring and trying to figure out is how to create business models that actually work for all people, you know? So a big part of that is, you know, if we're going to transition from this way of doing business that's all driven on you're selling a result, which is very short-sighted, it's very myopic. We're only ever thinking about this one little piece of the pie that we can see. It's not connected to the body of work that our life actually represents, and that everything we do in our life is contributing to that. So yes, I was a yoga teacher for 15 years. That work, even though it might not seem connected to what I do now, it's still absolutely relevant because it was the stepping stones that brought me to where I am now. It's informed everything that I do today. So getting ourselves to think in terms of our life experience being a body of work that we contribute to the world, and then think in terms of not buying a service to get a specific result from somebody, but supporting someone's ability to make that contribution to the world. So it might be on Patreon, or I know you're switching to Mighty Networks now, Alexis.
Yeah.
We're finding alternate platforms for our business models and inviting people into the conversation to, you know, like if you like what Alexis is writing, if you think she's a thought leader, then we have to support her to continue being able to make that contribution, right? If she's got to go out and work a job all day, she doesn't have time to write, that's not going to happen. So really changing how we think about what is it that we actually value. Do I value my result of being sold some bullshit story about how I'm going to make X number of dollars in this amount of time and then be hooked up to an IV machine that says I have to spend that money over and over and over and over again to keep filling the trough and fill their wells as well as my own by making everybody else be broken? Or am I going to invest in supporting the people who are making art in whatever way, shape, or form that might be, that changes the way we live in the world?
Yeah,
it's
no, I
change that has to happen. The online space is pretty pathetic most of the time. I think right now, like, we really need some radical upheaval there.
No, it's true. I mean, I have to say, it's very much true. I mean, I got on the online space in 2014. That was actually when I got in, when I did B school. And even, that was like sort of, I didn't even know about that world before, at least not like that. I mean, when I say online, as a online business, I mean, you know, because obviously I was on Facebook before, but it's just that it's true, because and for me, when I really started noticing it was when, you know, around, well, it was 2014, when I was seeing with the Trayvon Martin, you know, all of these things that were happening. And then I would be like, wait a minute, I would not see my fellow women entrepreneurs talking about it.
Yeah.
You know, and even now to this day, you know, there's so many things happening, and you would see very few people are actually talking about what, you know, what matters, what's going on around us. It's almost like they're all in this bubble.
Yeah.
You know?
They're on the shore.
Yeah, they're on the shore. Now I'm going to start using your term, they're on the shore. No, it's true, because then you're like, wait a minute, like what, you know? And yeah, definitely. Actually, I recall once somebody even posted, and actually for me, I kind of took offense on it. Like, you know, she posted something like, oh, well, just because things are happening, you can still share about what's happening with you. That's glorious. And it's like, you know what? I don't mind that you can share about what's happening for you. That's great. But I think that there's, you know, it'll be good if you would actually acknowledge what's happening to my community, what's happening with my people, what's happening with, you know, what's happening around us. And, you know, can you at least acknowledge it, you know? So yeah. Totally.
Well, the challenge, I think, in the online space and like the world in general, and, you know, women, we're finding our capacity together, right? That women now are earning more money than they ever have before in the history of humanity. And as we have access to more resources, even though we're not being paid equally, we're building our capacity, our consciousness to be more discerning about how we earn money, how we spend money, how we invest money, how we save money. And women allocate their resources in very different ways than men do. And so every time we're changing this conversation and we're talking about the power that we actually do have to make an impact, there is a ripple effect, right? We're building all of that capacity together. And in the online space, I think that largely people are operating in this very unconscious manner. And so every time we see something that is unconscious, we have an opportunity to take a stand. Even if we don't take a stand with that person, we can unfollow them. We can use that as like, I'm going to write an essay about that, you know, or I'm going to dissect what was wrong with that. Like one of the things I'll do in my group is post something and say, okay, let's critique this. What works, what doesn't work, you know, what's triggering, what's not, because we're so enmeshed in all of these things. It's really hard for us to see the ways in which we're complicit with the very things that in another context we might be standing up for and saying, no, I'm against that, but not recognizing how we're contributing to it. So we're all learning this process together. And there's a big fear when you're like out on the edge. We'll say when you're in the ocean and there's only 3 people and the rest of humanity's on the shore, it's really easy to doubt yourself and be like, oh, we must not have it right. We must be doing something wrong and they've got it right. You know what I mean? So this building capacity is really important, like these conversations where you have an opportunity to recognize that it's like, no, that thing I was feeling when I was over there, that was real. And I have to honor that. And even if I'm here all alone in the water, I have to stay here.
Totally.
So I feel like, you know, that's where we can really make an impact, is just inviting people to be in the water with us and recognize our job is not to sell a result. Our job is not to get any results. Our job is to build capacity for ourselves, for each other, for the whole world.
Totally. Thank you. Okay. So, wow, ladies, this was so great. Thank you so much. So right now I want to give each of you an opportunity to tell people a bit more about your work and also where they can connect with you, although all your information will be below the video on my website. And then also, if you're listening to us to Apple Podcasts, you visit my website, www.lovelightcoaching.com, and you'll see all the, you know, more about these wonderful ladies, women doing amazing work. So Alexis, you want to start and tell people about a bit more about your work, and then also where they can connect with you on social media or your website?
Sure. So my blog / my website, my brand, whatever you want to call it, is the Church of St. Felicia, and that's the website will be down below. I have, as of this interview, I have a Patreon where I'm working on sharing writing that I don't share on social media, because I post a lot to Facebook and to Medium and to other accessible places for free, so that people can read my words and do with them what they will. In the legal sense, it doesn't violate my copyrights. But anyway, but I have a Patreon where people can support me for as little as $1. However, Patreon recently shot themselves in the foot. And fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, I should have moved. So I'm moving my operation off of Patreon and onto Mighty Networks sometime in early 2018. So I will be present over there more and sort of pouring more of myself into that community and into that space. And we're still figuring out all the details of that. And then also in 2018, I finally realized that I could do very small group coaching versus like 6 to 10 people at a time, or, you know, doing the one-to-one thing. So I'm offering very small group coaching, and we're basically what it is part of it is like debate, but for adults. So debate club for adults, slightly modified and focused on systems thinking and systems problem solving and creation. So basically envisioning the future and like taking problems that we have right now and then sort of envisioning solutions and discussing that and engaging around those types of things. But I'll also be sharing the processes and the techniques that I use for writing, and also like looking at philosophy and kind of like these big kind of metaphysical questions, critical thinking, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I'll basically be doing that with two small groups of people, of like 3 or 4 people in each group. And that'll be available sometime in 2018. And yeah, other than that, I just kind of create what I want and move through the universe. So that's me.
Great, thank you. Siobhan?
Everyone can find me at stirringthesoul.com. That's my website. And actually, I don't even have a full website up right now. I just have a landing page. So from that landing page, you can join the Meaning Maker movement, get on the mailing list. You can join our Meaning Maker free Facebook group. And basically, most people now, a big part of what I've been doing with my business is kind of laying a breadcrumb trail that really helps people to build that capacity. So the first step in that is to come on to our mailing list, so that you're starting to learn the language basically of this ego soul orientation, and then join our free community. And from there, you can join one of our membership communities. The lowest level for that is called Elevate, and there's access to that on the landing page if anyone's interested.
Great, okay. Well, again, thank you so much, ladies, and I hope you all enjoyed this. You got a lot of information. I know we talked about a whole lot. Actually, we ended up doing this in 2 episodes. And if you really enjoyed this and you don't want to miss any other episode of Soulful Conversations, after all the information, all these ladies' information on my website, you'll see a box. You can subscribe to my email list. Every Thursday, a new episode is available, and you can get it directly on your inbox. If you subscribe to my email list, and then once you do so, you confirm your subscription, you will also get my free gift, which is my 7 questions to help you reconnect with yourself and have an aligned message in your business. And also you'll get tips and inspiration from me every week, in addition to the Thursday morning that you will get a new episode of Soulful Conversations. So thank you again. Love and light to all.
Thank you.
Thank you.